Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick, Whalen and Joe Bartel hanging out with you, recording this one on a Tuesday. We have a SuperFlex draft that went down in Madison last week that we're going to take you through, talk about some of the interesting picks, some of the strategy behind that. Before we get to the draft, though, we are brought to you, as always, by the Circa Resort and Casino out in Las Vegas. The ultimate fantasy football draft can only take place in one city. That is Las Vegas, Nevada. Circa Resort and Casino wants to bring your whole league to Vegas with the ultimate fantasy football experience giveaway. The winner brings your 12-person league for a 2-night stay at Circa Resort, and you get to have your draft at a cabana down at Stadium Swim, plus limo transportation to and from the airport, a welcome party at the Legacy Club, a booth at the world's largest sports book, and a whole lot more. There's no better place to draft than Circa. 21 and up, go to circalasvegas.com for more information. All right, Joe, let's set the stage a little bit here. If you listened to last week's episode, you can always go back and listen to it. Your preferred podcast provider. You can also find it archived on our YouTube channel. We talked through a pretty basic, 12-team PPR league that we did with some RotoWire staffers in Madison last week. After that draft, I had to hightail it to the Tornado Room Steakhouse for our NBA Fantasy League dinner, which thankfully I was not paying for this year. I think I was a buyer in 2 previous years, Joe. So that's like good. $700 worth of steak dinners on the bill. Mm-hmm. I believe the bill came in at about $360 a person.
I only heard 300. Maybe
it was definitely north of 300. It was definitely north of 300. Right. It might have been 340, somewhere in that range. But while I was doing that, you and some of the other football guys took part in another draft. This was a 14-teamer, a SuperFlex League. So, of course, you have the ability to start 2 quarterbacks. That obviously changes things quite a bit when you look at this draft board, Joe. So I'll let you set the stage. You were in the draft. I'm just going to be asking you questions about it. How do you prefer a SuperFlex League versus a more traditional, PPR 1 QB league?
Yeah, so I wrote about this on RotoWire.com. You can find my Twitter, JB Fantasy Sports. If you want to follow along with the draft board, it's also going to be on the article as well, too. It's not just SuperFlex. I think that's really key for our conversation. It's double point tight end premium. So you think about normally when sickos are doing SuperFlex leagues, it's like 12-team and SuperFlex, or it's 14-team and SuperFlex. I've not been in many drafts where it's 14-team, SuperFlex, and 2 points per reception for tight ends specifically. I made this a category in my article saying, don't do this sort of like redraft league. If you have a choice, like I understand, we watch football on Sundays all the time. The quarterback position is the premium. Making a fantasy format that makes the quarterback position as valuable as we see in real life, completely understand that. To make the tight ends as valuable as, I don't know, they certainly aren't as valuable on Sundays, is a weird spot for me to be in. So I've been in the point and a half, 1.5 points per reception leagues for tight ends. To have a 2 points per reception was, I think, a challenge. Now, thankfully or not thankfully, I don't think most of my league mates recognized that scoring system. In fact, I think there was really only 2 people, the creator of the league, Alan Seslowsky, and then Mario Puig, who had the actual rules up, that recognized it right away, which is why you see Trey McBride and Brock Bowers in the middle of the first round. But those 2 teams also doubled up at tight end with George Kittle and Evan Ingram just a little bit later on in the draft. It's really interesting. And to put it in juxtaposition of 12 other people who were kind of doing SuperFlex a not conventional way, but a different way, felt like there's 3 different marriages of a 14-team league taking place. I don't know if I like one team more than the other necessarily. There are maybe some builds that I like overall, but man, I thought from a strategy perspective, if you're listening to this being like, I'm going to be in a SuperFlex league soon, or even the Scott Fishbowl, for example, later in the month, those are SuperFlex leagues to a certain degree too. This is going to be really instrumental, not just here are the dummies at RotoWire and how they drafted, but I thought strategy-wise, there are literally 3 unique different ways people are playing it all in one league, and you can kind of see it play out. And if you like that build or not, you can copy it.
All right, so let me put the draft board up here for us, Joe. There, we could see it on the screen now. Yeah. So we did this on Sleeper. We did it live, of course, in Madison. I think you did a good job, laying out some of the unique qualities of this draft. Let's start with the most important thing, your team here. So you had the number 5 overall pick. Josh Allen, of course, goes 1-1. Chris, our guy at RotoWire, decided to take Jamar Chase at 1-2. We had a quarterback, Lamar Jackson, another quarterback, Jaden Daniels. You went quarterback, Jalen Hurts, with the 5th overall pick.
Yeah, and I think this is actually the teardrops. You'll see Joe Burrow got selected right after, and then 2 picks after that, Patrick Mahomes, which is, again, conventionally what SuperFlex leagues are going to be. I remember last year for the Scott Fish Bowl, the first 10 picks were quarterbacks, and that included my complete stinker of Anthony Richardson, which was like pick 9 or whatever it was. Like, you will normally see that happen. I thought it was really interesting that after Patrick Mahomes, the consensus, and this was a lot of experts, people who have done this before, people who are knowledgeable that have been preparing, at least from best ball perspective, on these drafts, said, all right, after Mahomes, I don't really need to go reach a quarterback. And that meant Baker Mayfield, that meant Bo Nick, that meant really any of the quarterbacks 10 through 14 that we've talked about a lot on Best Ball Podcast, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Kyler Murray, Jared Goff. Nobody really needed to push them up into the first round. And I think it really led to a dichotomy from a SuperFlex perspective that I thought was really fascinating. I like Jalen for what it's worth, 4 points per passing touchdown. Jalen Hurts is uniquely valuable in this format over a Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if I would have taken Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb over those guys. I wouldn't have been smart enough to consider Brock Bowers and Trey McBride over those guys, but it would have been at that point where I would consider not taking a quarterback after Jalen Hurts. So I felt really fortunate in that regard to have pick 5 or whatever it was.
Well, did you consider taking another quarterback in round 2? Because like we said, there was kind of a lull in the quarterbacks after Mahomes. We had Lamb, Jefferson, Bijan, Barkley, Gibbs, Genty, St. Brown, Nakua, Henry, McCaffrey, Neighbors, and Brian Thomas. Then Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix go, and there's kind of another gap until early in round 3. And you'll see this is 3rd round reversal where we had Goff, Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy. Did you consider any of those guys at 210? Or if we want to tip this off here, were you waiting for your guy in round 3, Jordan Love?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've had this conversation before about this tier of quarterbacks, and I kind of just applied it, even though it was super flex format, the same way. I don't really want to go ahead and reach or draft a Bo Nix or Baker Mayfield at cost. And the same would kind of go for Kyler Murray. We had this conversation in the redraft league last week where I should have taken Kyler Murray. I think, say what you want about him, but the rushing floor alone gives you a safety net of sorts. I didn't want to over prioritize the second quarterback in Superflex. And if I had a later first round pick, I would have probably at some point taken one of those guys. But in my mind, it was, all right, I have an elite position at Jalen Hurts, just like you did with Jaden Daniels in the 12-team redraft last year or last week. You don't really need to go ahead and be uber aggressive when the difference of quarterback 12 is not significant in this case. Let's just say Jordan Love, not significant to Michael Penix at quarterback 21. And that was sort of what I was viewing. Now, in hindsight, I almost wish I would have been a bit more aggressive. Not even that I wanted to have my roster have the first 2 quarterbacks off the board, but really to punish the people who chose to wait. Of this draft of 14 teams, 7 people did not take a quarterback until the 3rd pick. I mean, like that. Typically in Superflex leagues, it's at least one quarterback that goes off for every team in the first 2 rounds, if not both. That we didn't prioritize or punish those people enough ended up being, again, like I said earlier, and I think is really, really fascinating, basically 7 different people drafting against another 6, and then the other 7 drafting against the other 6 too. Like there really was a weird kind of a diversification of how these teams are built.
I think some of those teams ended up doing just fine, right? Our guy Thorne, who was picking at 111, he ends up with Purdy, Geno, took a stab at Anthony Richardson as a 3rd quarterback. I mean, I don't know that I would spend a 7th round pick on Anthony Richardson, but I get it. You got the first 2 at least locked in. Pick 12, they went Caleb Williams and Matthew Stafford in the 3rd and the 4th. Pick 13, our guy Jake Latarski got Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, Russell Wilson. Took a deep shot on Jalen Milroe in the 12th round. Jeff Erickson, he also waited on quarterback, took Penix and Bryce Young. Varying degrees of confidence to me in some of those builds. I'm looking at Team 10 here. Joe, I don't know who Team 10 is, whoever Dat Boy 3273 is. I have no idea. This is the one I worry about, where you got Tua in round 4, didn't take another quarterback until round 12. And that was Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is going to start some number of games for the Colts. I don't know what that number is. It might be low.
No, you're right. And that's the worst case scenario. I know who that person was. I don't think we need to out them from a draft perspective. It's possible they would have been the least prepared of the 14 experts. And maybe that's why the results show what they were. when you have not done a SuperFlex draft before, and again, if this is really for a lot of new listeners out there who might be in SuperFlex drafts for the first time, or again, preparing for Scott Fishbowl at the end of the month, if you're unfamiliar with this, the idea of what we've talked about on a month straight of podcast, man, quarterback 8, Baker Mayfield, is no different than Michael Penix at quarterback 21. I don't need to be aggressive. It isn't that is now changed. It's that there are 13 in this case in the SuperFlex leagues, 13 of the people that are going to prioritize that position more. And whether you think it's different or not, you can't get caught holding the bag. So you can't get caught in the scenario where you have Tua being your one quarterback and then Daniel Jones or Aaron Rodgers or Tyler Shuck being your second one. Like, yeah, those guys are going to play and start. And there is value in saying your roster construction everywhere else can be deeper. But you are putting yourself in the back nine already when you're just going ahead and having one of those guys out there. So what, to your point, like, I took Jordan Love in the 3rd round. Was I going to get my guy? Not necessarily. I didn't want to get caught in a spot where I was chasing, trying to figure out what that might look like. And in my mind, the positional tier that I like afterwards, so the pick right after was Lab McConkey, Breece Hall. You look at Terry McLaurin. That was not enough of a difference to make me uneasy at my quarterback 2 spot. And I would much rather have that solidified, know what else I want to do the rest of the draft, as opposed to, I'll take Lab McConkey and then maybe I'm Dak Prescott is left, or I have to go afterwards. Like I didn't want to be in that spot.
All right. So this is 2 points per reception for tight ends, correct?
Correct.
And it's not like double points for touchdowns, obviously, right? It's just
no first down stuff like the Scott Fishbowl drafts either. No.
Okay. So given that, do you think tight ends were valued appropriately, right?
No.
Brock Bowers goes 1.7, Trey McBride goes 1.8. After that, it's like, everybody kind of gets a moderate boost, but it doesn't look all that different, from what you might see in a non-tight end premium draft. So talk a little bit about that.
I think that's because the rest of us played it wrong. And again, I go back to that there was 14 people in this draft. One of them being Alan Sosowski, the creator of the league, would have known the settings of the Mario Puig, who had it pulled up on his phone. I think they played it correctly. Now, I don't know. The problem ends up being, if only 2 people are drafting a certain way and 12 other people are valuing the tight end position differently, are you really winning? Because you can look at this right now on the YouTube page. You can look at my article again on JB Fantasy Sports and my Twitter later on. Like, I liked Mario's team a lot. I talk about in the article, the receivers are Brian Thomas, DJ Moore, Chris Olave, Khalil Shakir. What's left when you do that plus another tight end and Evan Ingram is your running backs by default are Jalen Warren, Jordan Mason. You're going to go ahead and get like an Audric Estime or J.K. Dobbins. Like, you are absolutely trying to throw darts to make that work. And it would be completely fine if even 4 other people value tight end higher and therefore there are more running backs left. But because the rest of the league, I think stupidly, frankly, didn't recognize what could happen, you are now at a disadvantage at that position. I think it's very fascinating. So you could sit here with the projections on RotoWire. We do a fantastic job at. We're going to have an app coming out later in the month that's going to be, I think, world-class from the fantasy industry as to getting you prepared for what your draft looks like, what's happening real time in your leagues. But if you're not able to read what the rest of the room is doing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you can have a complete team in that regard.
I want to talk about team 2. That was our guy, Chris Knutsvig. Kind of bucked the trend early on, went Jamar Chase at 1-2, still ended up with 2 viable quarterbacks. Of course, didn't even need to burn a 2nd round pick on those guys, waited till the end of round 3 and then the beginning of round 4 to grab CJ Stroud and Trevor Lawrence, paired them with Jamar Chase and Bucky Irving. I like that start a lot, Joe. I think he pulled it off. I don't know that I love Ted McMillan and Travis Hunter back-to-back in rounds 5 and 6.
So I'm not trying to like out you. Did you read my article at all before we did this podcast today?
No, okay. I never read your articles, Joe. Why would I do that?
Okay.
No, I actually didn't. I actually did not. No.
I think you normally do, which is I wasn't trying to like make you like.
No, I have not read your article. Is this something you touched on? I assume.
Yes, I literally said I love this build. Now the article doesn't actually have the picture on. They're going to fix that after we're done with the podcast. But I really thought this was the best example. If you choose to wait at tight end, we have somebody in the comment section right now that says, "Well, they'll normally take one quarterback in the first 2 rounds, then build their roster." That's what I did. I feel fine doing that. If you were to wait at quarterback and your first end up being C.J. Stroud and Trevor Lawrence in round 3 and 4, this is a beautiful way to do it. And I thought we had people at the bar where we were doing the draft, putting the stickers up, laughing a little bit because Chris was also, I think, at the NBA Stake League.
He was.
We were like, Jamar Chase number 2. That's Lamar Jackson. He's passing over. That's Jaden Daniels. That's Jalen Hurts. This is executed brilliantly because I think CJ Stroud is going to be a better fantasy quarterback this year than he was last year. I certainly think Trevor Lawrence is too. But if you had just replaced, let's just say, Ted McMillan with Mike Evans, and you would replace Travis Hunter with Devontae Adams.
Oh, yeah.
That's a team that looks incredibly good. It's like we got caught up in the sauce with this rookie lust. We want to have whatever Travis Hunter and Ted McMillan would be. It's like, wait. This is like a guaranteed 250 points from each of these guys at minimum. And I don't know if you could say that about either of the rookies. Literally, this was a perfect team if the rookies weren't selected and you had other veteran receivers in there instead. So I pointed out in the article, and I'm glad you mentioned it here now, because even in the best case scenario, one where you really land the plane, it absolutely matters as to what players you're taking in those spots, because you're now, I think, in this build, the way Chris did it, again, I like a lot, depending on the ceiling outcome occurring. And I don't know, even the most bulletproof prospect, Marvin Harrison, last year, doesn't like you have to have that ceiling occur for this team roster to have that way. And it makes me very uncomfortable.
So like you said, you grabbed your early quarterback. You're able to essentially draft, as normal after that. You got to get another quarterback. You grab Jordan Love in round 3. But if you're one of these teams that you don't take a quarterback in round 1, you pass again in round 2, you have that like burning obligation in the back of your mind. You can't really just build your team the way you want. You can't really go best player available. You need to make sure you lock in those 2 quarterbacks. You opted to prioritize receiver around Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love. You took your guy Drake London in round 2. You got JSN in round 4. You got Rashee Rice in round 5. I mean, this is a Nick Whalen draft board receiver dream. I love it. But as a consequence of that, obviously you are deprioritizing running back. You're deprioritizing tight end in a tight end premium league. How did you feel about your running back room? We'll start there. You got Kamara in round 6. You got Caleb Johnson in round 7. Started to take some more shots later in the draft. Najee Harris, Devin Neal. Then you grabbed Nick Chubb later on. And this was, of course, before we knew the landing spot for Chubb.
Correct. You had said the consequence of taking the receivers heavy means I had this running back class. From all the podcasts we've done over the past month and a half, do you really feel like this is a consequence to me? I would imagine no.
It's a consequence. Maybe it's not too much of a compromise. I'm not saying you didn't know what you were doing, but your RB1 is Alvin Kamara, right? There are other teams out there that have 2 or 3 running backs on the board before you took 1.
You're right. I think consequence, and I have a 3-year-old at home. I'm trying to teach what consequences are to him. Good luck. Would necessitate it's a bad thing, right? Like X happened, and therefore this bad result occurred. Yep. I don't feel like this is a consequence. I will happily have Alvin Kamara as my running back 1, and I will happily have a Caleb Johnson as my running back 2. Now, the consequence with this build being 3 receivers, 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 picks is typically the depth at running back gets tested. And I think that's probably the area in which I don't feel great about. I don't mind Najee Harris as a running back 3. I think he will be a factor for the Chargers. I had been sniped 2 picks prior on Aaron Jones one over Calvin Ridley. In hindsight, like I would have really liked this build a lot more if I had Aaron Jones as my running back 3 and still had Najee Harris as 4. You're throwing the dart throws at Devin Neal as my backup to Alvin Kamara. We mentioned Nick Chubb as well. I don't think he's going to get cut necessarily. There's only 16 player rosters, but Nick Chubb for the Bears would have felt a whole lot better than Nick Chubb now with his current landing spot with the Texans. It's not ideal, but in the event Kamara gets injured, I think I have the backup of Devin Neal, though we'll have to see with Kendra Miller and what happens throughout the course of training camp. There's a misconception about people waiting at running back this year. And I'm really trying to push this narrative out there that waiting running back isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be considered the correct strategy, but it absolutely is a strategy. Now you can mess it up. You could take the Ted McMillans and Travis Hunters of the world and make sure that you have to have the ceiling play occur. But in reality, if you're just getting floor receivers, and I don't even like JSN to the extent that you do, we both like Rashee Rice, but there's legitimate suspension concerns that probably still are available. Sure. If you just get the floors for these receivers, then you're talking about a scenario where whether it be David Montgomery or James Conner or Aaron Jones, these running backs that have injury concerns, you get their backups, you get their handcuff scenarios, and then you're set on saying, I have Vikings starting running back. I have Cardinals starting running back as my running back 2, and you're in a really good spot to say, just from a points perspective, this is going to accumulate throughout the whole year. Maybe I won't get a Saquon Barkley boom week or Derrick Henry boom week, but I'm still going to get running back 12 production every single time for an 8th round selection. I think this matters a lot. And I actually wrote about it in the article. I'm going to write about more. I'm going to end up writing an article on the 12 team redraft. Where you're drafting is going to, I think, based off the ADP we're seeing on ESPN, on Sleeper, on Yahoo right now, the tier range that you're drafting is going to end up either saying, I will have running back depth or I will have receiver depth. That's what's happening right now with the way the ADP is breaking. I think this is actually the most clearest example, even in a 14 team where there's multiple multiple points, to kind of play out this way. I think it's really, really fascinating.
All right, sorry, I'm a little shaken right now. I just saw a note from Mike Garafolo who said that Aaron Rodgers showed up to Steelers camp with a wedding ring on. He said he's been married for a couple of months. To whom?
I don't know if it matters. I thought you were going to say that you got the report that J.K. Dobbins signed a 1-year deal with the Broncos.
Yeah, that's secondary here. I'm more on Aaron Rodgers' marriage watch. But no, you are right. I was going to bring that up next. Signing a 1-year, $5.25 million deal with the Denver Broncos.
Frustrating. I have been a big proponent of RJ Harvey and his current ADP. We just talked about VSiN actually about an hour ago. And I said, I don't mind RJ Harvey in NFFC drafts right now for the past month was pick 56. That RJ Harvey will then split time with J.K. Dobbins is a little bit frustrating in my mind. But there was a compilation on Twitter I saw of Sean Payton over the years talking up X, Y, and Z player. And it went through like a litany of has been Saints players and a few of these Broncos guys that we had the Sean Payton. I was going to say massage, but I don't want to get but we had the Sean Payton pump up here for Audric Estime means absolutely zilch and now completely means nothing. Cause I think that's what J.K. Dobbins does. It's funny. Dobbins is not like this built running back, but he can absorb a lot of carries. And in the way I think the Broncos offense function, it's Dobbins and RJ Harvey operating much like Dobbins and Gus Edwards did last year for the Chargers.
So this obviously hurts RJ Harvey to some degree, but you think this is more about just kind of eliminating Audric Estime, less of Jaleel McLaughlin, nothing from Tyler Batty.
Correct. Yeah. And if we're all comfortable taking Amari Hampton as like the third, fourth, fifth round running back and running back 2 of the rookies, which I think I am, I don't really have an issue with it. Then you shouldn't be that scared off about J.K. Dobbins, who is a career injury risk, being able to usurp or cut into RJ Harvey's workload. I think in the best case scenario that Dobbins stays healthy, RJ Harvey is still getting a prominent factor, and more importantly, a lot of targets from that offense.
I want to back up and ask you about your second round pick. We mentioned you started Jalen Hurts at 1.5. You got Drake London at 2.10. And if you're looking at the board live here on the YouTube stream, it is third round reversal. So Nico Collins went with the first pick in the third round to Jeff Erickson. AJ Brown went a little bit later in the third. I know you weren't taking Ladd McConkey, who went 3.11, but how close was the debate between London and Collins for you?
Really close. I have went back and forth on best ball in particular. I've done probably close to 30 best balls. I have at least 16 rolls of either pick 11 or 12. I don't know why Underdog hates me to this degree, but I'm trying to just diversify my shares on best ball. In redraft, I don't, I think you had said yesterday, and I don't mind you saying, last podcast, I don't mind you saying it, but I already have X player, so I want to get Y player.
Exactly.
I don't really subscribe to that theory. Like if I'm going to be pot committed to Josh Jacobs, I'm going to just damn well do it. Like I'm going to have a lot of Josh Jacobs. So in my mind, Drake London has proven to be healthier throughout the course of his career than Nico Collins. That's not saying Nico Collins can't be healthy or that the 3 or 4 games he might miss every other year is a big deal, but that's the difference maker for me. We saw what Drake London did with Michael Penix week 18. I don't know if that plays out the entire course of the year, but my God, what if it does? What if we get like 85% of that throughout the course of the season? Even the highest that I think Nico Collins is going to get to. You're saying Drake London's going to be healthy most of the season and he can do that with Michael Penix. It's a no-brainer in my mind. So every time if it's those 2 left, it's Drake London or Nico Collins. If it's Brian Thomas or Drake London, that's where I'm going to try to split the shares from a redraft perspective and say, well, I have X amount of this, I might get some more. Because I do think there is a difference between those 2, but I will take Drake London over Nico Collins just about every time.
Well, I think we could throw week 17 into that sample as well for Drake London. 31 targets over the final 2 games of the season for London. Only caught 17 of those for what it's worth. So it wasn't overly efficient, but was just being peppered by Michael Penix. I want to ask you a little bit about Team 6, our guy, Harry Thompson. Very, very good fantasy player, works on the tech side for us, but always finds a way to like shark everybody in these leagues, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, it doesn't seem to matter. So he started Joe Burrow and Bo Nix. I'm curious about what you think about his running backs. Didn't take a running back until round 5, where he got Kenneth Walker. He gets Montgomery in the 7th, Swift in the 8th, Javonte Williams in the 10th. I think as far as waiting on running back goes, I kind of like this mix of upside and safety, which I think you're getting in Montgomery. There's certainly upside with DeAndre Swift. He's the only guy right now in Chicago. Kenneth Walker is just kind of a guy that I haven't been drafting a ton of. I'm not in, I'm not out. I'm just kind of agnostic on him. And, we could talk all we want about the Dallas backfield. I don't know how it's going to play out. There are two pretty underwhelming options to me at the top in
Sure.
Javonte Williams, and even more underwhelming in Miles Sanders. I'd like to see what we have in Jaden Blue. I know you're a little bit lower on him than I am, but ultimately he waited on running back, and, he got kind of like a half starter in David Montgomery and a really good offense, and three guys right now who are sitting atop the depth chart. So to me, not bad for a guy who waited until round 5.
I like this team build a lot, and I'm really glad that you pointed this one out specifically too. So let's talk about something a little bit earlier that you said that I think it's interesting. This is a mix of running backs of Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, and DeAndre Swift. That's a mix of upside and safety. When I say Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, and DeAndre Swift, I don't know where the upside is actually that's coming from that trio. But like I get the extent of, all right, DeAndre Swift in a Ben Johnson offense is upside.
That's
but,
the upside.
Oh, wait. We literally saw that with the Lions, and Ben Johnson wanted nothing to do with that. There wasn't upside with DeAndre Swift in a Ben Johnson offense. And David Montgomery, the upside maybe is scoring touchdowns, but you should.
He's the safety one here.
Okay, fine. But like either way, I think it's fair to have concerns. It doesn't mean that it'll actually happen. It's fair to have concerns. The Lions offense won't be as potent as they have been under Ben Johnson. So like there is a safety part of it for David Montgomery, but I don't know if there's the ceiling there. I think the Kenneth Walker part actually is the ceiling if you're going to go that direction, but it's not Kenneth Walker as the ceiling. It's Kenneth Walker coupled with Zach Charbonnet, because Charbonnet ended up winning leagues last year when Kenneth Walker was out. And it's that scenario, that one unique scenario where I actually really want that, where I can get the upside bill. I think this is a great roster that will absolutely be one of the best throughout the course of the season. If we're playing 14 games to get to the playoffs, Harry's team, I don't know if it's the odds on favorite to make the playoffs, but they are absolutely in that mix. Do they have the boom players to win you those weeks? And I think the answer is, well, Joe, that can change. Nobody would have guessed that Justin Jackson 3 years ago in that 1 week Austin Eckler was out would win people leagues. Harry's awesome at managing his rosters. I have no doubt that he'll be able to find those from a waiver wire perspective if they're there. But if this is just a best ball perspective, or if, again, I'm thinking about Scott Fishbowl in a couple of weeks, you don't really always have that luxury. And I would have loved to mix in like a Trey Benson, if I can't do a Zach Charbonnet, to give me that boom potential over Javonte Williams. That's where I was going to get to with the Cowboys running backs. So you have Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift. Conventionally, that's a floor. If I can get a boom guy, if I can get a Trey Benson, if I can get a Zach Charbonnet, great. Maybe Javonte Williams is that. I mean, like Tony Pollard last year was being drafted in the same sort of range. And when Tony Pollard was healthy, the volume alone ended up making him a boom relative to his value. I think the worst case, but best case scenario for Harry is every single week he has to decide of these four, which 3 or 4 do I start? And that's a good spot to be to make the playoffs. But if it means trying to win the championship, we'll have to see. Some things have to break their way. It's a 14-team league. I wrote about in the article. There has never been a person in the history of 14-team drafts who said, man, my team top to bottom is awesome. Love it. Can't wait. That's never happened. But this is as close to examples, I think, of getting a roster that really can do that sort of thing.
What did you think about the running backs for Team 7? Alan Soslowski, another team that waited even longer on running back. He started Bowers, Mayfield, Herbert, Kittle, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams. I love that. Love everything about that for the first 6. So he ends up with R.J. Harvey, Ramondre Stevenson, Roschon Johnson, Rico Dowdle, Kendre Miller, Keaton Mitchell as his running back room.
So let's combine this with Mario's team as well, too, because, again, these two teams were basically the ones that identified 2 points per reception for tight end, and the rest of the league did not. So you had Brock Bowers and Trey McBride go back-to-back, and then you had Allen's team take George Kittle in round 4, Mario's team take Evan Ingram in round 6. I don't think there's a consequential difference between that. The running back room for each was a little bit tricky, and it's almost like you and I, who have done a lot of these redraft leagues, and I know Mario and Alan have as well, too. I'm not saying they don't. We're aware that there is a complete tier drop-off at receiver. So if we're going to do the Nick Whalen approach from last week's podcast, I'm going to be elite at least 2 positions, if not more. then they've crushed this. Like if that's the way you want to address your roster in a draft, no matter if it's super flex, 12 team, whatever, this is the best you're going to get. You're going to have an advantage at flex theoretically every week between Evan Ingram and George Kittle. You have receivers that matter a lot with Brian Thomas that fell, I think, far too far. DJ Moore, Chris Olave, I love those guys. Even like the T. Higgins and Devontae Adams, I don't like that sort of idea, like those players, but the idea I completely get behind. I feel really gross in a league of experts, and this is specifically all of us, saying, oh yeah, I'm going to find the next rookie year Kyren Williams. There's 14 people in this draft. That means there's also 14 people signing people off of waivers and getting those guys. And it's 16 players per roster. There will not be these just dart throws available to you. So either you're going to get it right in the draft or you get incredibly lucky. Nick, I am not lucky at all. At all. I can't ever bet on luck working in my favor. So I get really anxious when I say I have to have something lucky work out for Jordan Mason and Jalen Warren, or RJ Harvey has to not get direct competition with J.K. Dobbins, or maybe Trayvon Henderson gets injured and that makes Ramondre Stevenson like the clear alpha back for the Patriots. Things don't work out luckily for me. So that's where I get a little bit concerned that I didn't have at least one alpha running back in this build.
All right, let's talk about our guy Peter Schenke's team. So tread lightly here, Joe. This is the guy who signs our paychecks at the end of the day. He's team 9. He takes Mahomes at 1-9. So kind of the last of the first tier of quarterbacks. He goes, 2 picks after Joe Burrow, and then we had a long gap until the next quarterback off the board, Baker Mayfield, in the middle of round 2. Grabs Malik Neighbors in the second, like that. Gets Kyler Murray in the third. So he's got his 2 quarterbacks: Chase Brown, Mark Andrews, Devontae Smith. Here's where it gets interesting: Jamison Williams, Tyler Shuck, Brian Robinson, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Tyler Algier, Jalen Wright. That takes us through round 13. Talk about taking some upside stabs. I like some of the shots that Peter took later in the draft.
So everyone who's not familiar with our RotoWire drafts, we typically do this SuperFlex and redraft in the very early part of July. And Peter is known, I think, across the company and certainly any of the social media clips is like, oh, that's the guy that has a lot of green on the score sheet when you're driving. Is it green is the position of running back? So he has 6 running backs of this group. And I think that might be one of the most, if not tied around that range. He'll always, especially if these drafts are early, just throw as many darts as he can at running back, thinking there's going to be some injury along the way. It worked out pretty well. Last year, I think Pete was one of the better finishers for the RotoWire Invitational, which was drafted around that point. But I like the idea. I wasn't at all surprised that he ended up having a lot of those dart throws. I don't really want to buy Jamison Williams this year. Talk about guys that we've done the fades or whatever the shows before. That probably fits my criteria of a receiver that I just don't want to have anything to do with. But I kind of wanted to pose this to you as somebody that's an outsider or neutral perspective, wasn't in this draft. It is not a bad idea to take Patrick Mahomes at 1-9 in a SuperFlex draft. But knowing now in hindsight how the rest of the league viewed these other quarterbacks, what if Pete had went CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson and then came back with a Malik Neighbors and then replaces the Chase Brown pick or somebody else with a secondary quarterback? That's an incredibly elite team. And we probably could have projected or foresaw that, knowing at pick 9, I'm going to miss out on this first tier of quarterbacks. And then we're going to have these tight end premium guys go after the board. Like it felt like it was a little bit left there of like, wow, this team could have been absolutely insane if it was constructed just a little bit differently early on.
I think, to be fair to Peter, if I had a redo on every draft and knew what was going to happen in the rounds after my picks, I would come away feeling significantly better. I wouldn't have taken Mahomes there personally. If you're really high on the Chiefs offense, getting back to being the Chiefs offense this year with a healthy Rice, with Hollywood back in there, we really didn't see those two together at all last season with a healthy Pacheco. Like there are things you could sell me on for the Chiefs to return to a borderline elite offense. I still think it's more likely that, Mahomes finishes somewhere between QB 7 and QB 12 than he does QB 1 through 5. So I personally would not have made that pick. I think Mahomes versus Mayfield, Mahomes versus Knicks, like these are real conversations. Easy to say in hindsight, though. What did you make of pairing him with Kyler Murray? At that point, was there a significantly better option on the board? I'm okay with that pick. Again, I would not have taken Mahomes 1-9, but there are reasons you can point to, I think, to justify that.
So I want to be clear. I used this article that I wrote about in this draft as here's what you guys, the listeners and readers, can do and plan accordingly for your drafts. Like, this is what happened. These are 14 smart people who know, sleep, breathe football. This is all we do. And this is how it unfolded. I would imagine there's not going to be a more collective, intelligent group of 14 people doing a draft, and Peter constitutes probably the top part of that. So I'm not saying it was a wrong selection. I really don't want to do that. I'm just pointing out what happened. And if you, the listener or reader, can then adjust accordingly in the way that you want to build your team, that's important to me. So to your point with the question on Mahomes and Kyler Murray as your third quarterback afterwards, it went Justin Fields, which is going to be, I think, Mario Puig's guy, and we can maybe get to that in a different portion of the shows moving forward. But I've listened to a lot of Mario, both on social media and on this very podcast network. I understand the theory of Justin Fields. It's very enticing. Again, as somebody that's not lucky at all in my life, I don't know if I can make that bet, but I'm never going to chastise somebody for doing it. After Kyler Murray was Fields, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Drake May, Trevor Lawrence, Prescott, and then JJ McCarthy was one pick before the Viking fan in Pete. I think you take Kyler Murray because you don't know what's going to come back. But if I would have had even a bit of stones, like saying, well, if I wait one more pick and I get JJ McCarthy as my QB instead of Kyler Murray, I think that's a really intriguing one too, because then you could have a Malik Neighbors and AJ Brown, or Malik Neighbors and Lad McConkey. You could throw in your running back, which I wouldn't have done, but like Malik Neighbors and Breece Hall, and then got your quarterback coming back. It's a very tricky way to play Superflex, just hoping that 10 other people, wherever your pick is, do something unconventional. But if you see those first two rounds play out unconventionally, I think it's fine to say, well, hey, the room just doesn't understand what this could be. I can adjust accordingly.
Well, I think to go back about, what you mentioned with that strategy and the benefit of hindsight, I think we essentially saw that with team 11 in Thorne, team 12, team 13, even Jeff on the wheel, right? Like every team after Pete essentially employed that same strategy, right? Of load up on two elite skill position players, whether it's Jefferson and Henry, Bijan and Nakua, Barkley and St. Brown, Gibbs and Genty, and then, take a minor hit at quarterback and you load up later. I mean, Jeff still ended up with two for sure starters in Penix and Bryce Young. Jake gets Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, and you can even plug in Russell Wilson, Caleb and Stafford, Purdy and Geno. Like it's certainly viable to do that. I will have to have Pete on the pod maybe to explain himself, because I think Pete's smart enough to know that was going to be an option for him. And I think he, looking at how the board shaped up, I think he wanted Patrick Mahomes there. Maybe he's just a believer in him. I do want to ask you about Dak Prescott. We're talking about, I'm trying to count this on the fly. I don't know. He was like the QB, 16, something like that.
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Went off the board at 4-4. So, we're talking after Drake May, after Trevor Lawrence. Is there a world in which we are dramatically underrating Dak Prescott with CeeDee Lamb, with George Pickens, with Jake Ferguson, a guy who 2 years ago was the QB3?
Yeah, I think Prescott actually, I believe I counted correctly, was quarterback 18 in this draft,
okay.
But that's not usual. I think Prescott's more conventionally quarterback 14 or 16 in that range. I wouldn't be shocked if Dak Prescott is this year's Baker Mayfield. Not so mobile quarterback in an offense that's super friendly from a fantasy perspective that ends up being quarterback 7. Now it'll be like 40-point difference between those. And unlike Baker Mayfield, who won people leagues last year in that 15 through 17 week range, I don't know if Dak Prescott does the same thing. I don't know the Cowboys schedule, but if you're saying cumulatively, you look at ESPN scoring at the end of the year, Dak Prescott's quarterback 8, I wouldn't be shocked at all. The problem ends up being, because I like to ride the fence, I wouldn't be shocked if Trevor Lawrence is quarterback 8. I wouldn't be shocked if Jordan Love is quarterback 8. I wouldn't be shocked if Kyler Murray and Justin Fields are quarterback 8. Like there's just too many in that range. Now, Dak Prescott is the cheapest typically of that group. And it's not any different than Jared Goff in my mind, who I don't think is going to have a second half that they had last year, where the Lions were completely decimated with all the injuries and therefore had to throw 4 touchdowns a game for the Lions to win games. Like that, I would flip Dak Prescott and Jared Goff around. And I think you are going to see in some of the sharper leagues, especially 6 points per passing touchdown, like our the leagues that we partner with, the
All right, what else do you want to hit from this draft, Joe? Won't go too much longer here, but any specific teams, any specific draft slots, any strategies, anything that I haven't mentioned that you wrote up in your article?
Yeah, we covered a lot of it. I talked about I labeled it 0 QB Superflex, but that wasn't really what actually occurred. I guess one team technically did. And we talked about the tight end 2 premium, where I think the tight ends should not be valued this way. Like, this is not how I engage with football. It's not what I watch on Sundays. I don't need Brock Bowers to be the 5th most valuable or 6th most valuable player in fantasy. And projection wise, it makes sense. But the other part that this is what I love, and I mentioned in the article, I'm just a dork and a geek with this. I like the redraft stuff, and I like the strategy of it a lot. So if you are in pick 1 through 5, and this is going to be super flex, but this can also be redraft as well too, like a 12-team normal standard-ish redraft. If you are pick 1 through 5, your team more often than not is going to be able to have running back depth. And when I say running back depth, if you just draft off of ADP, if we just mock this out, Quinshon Judkins or Caleb Johnson will be your running back 3. You could probably have a Zach Charbonnet or Trey Benson as your running back 4. And if you're picking at the back end of the draft, if you take a Drake London, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors in the first round, you will conventionally have receivers. If you're just going off of ADP, that will be your wide receiver 3, 4, and 5 depth-wise. This is not, Nick is going to reach at pick 3 for a running back, and that's what he needs to have. Like, the ADP is actually really breaking out for both these dichotomies to happen. And you're going to get asked this. I know, Nick, I've already been asked this. What's your favorite pick? What's your favorite pick range? I like those questions, but I end up talking over by everyone's head because they just want you to tell you the number. And I'm like, no. Here's 30 minutes why this pick matters over this pick. I'm doing it right now because I think it does matter. If you like to have rosters where you know what your running backs are going to be, pick an early pick. If you get that option, or if you can trade your pick, whatever it is, get running backs when you have picks 1 through 5. If you feel really good about receivers and understanding what the value tiers are, you've listened to Nick and I enough times and said, oh yeah, Brandon Ayuk is absolutely a value as a wide receiver 4. Like, sure, Chris Olave, if he stays healthy and has his head on, will definitely be really good. Then take 9 through 12. Have that range. But I have not seen a scenario in my 10 years at RotoWire where I felt like the ADP so clearly is split as to this side of the draft is running backs, this side is receiver. And if you are aware of it, if you study some of these drafts that the experts do, it allows you to be a bit more flexible and to spot call some of these players earlier on the ADP because you know what's coming back around the turn.
All right, I want to end on this because I think we had an interesting stretch of running backs come off the board all in round 8. Starting with Isaiah Pacheco at 8-2, Aaron Jones at 8-4, DeAndre Swift at 8-6, Etienne 8-11, Tony Pollard 8-14. To me, there is a line of demarcation that could be drawn after Tony Pollard. I think after that, you're getting into, well, you could maybe talk me into Brian Robinson being a part of that tier. I guess it's really after Brian Robinson is when you get into the true either clear split or clear number 2 running backs. We're talking Jalen Warren, Cam Scatterbo, Zach Charbonnet, Tyrone Tracy, Najee Harris, etc. But those running backs who went in round 8, do you agree in the order that they went?
Pacheco first, foremost. We talked about that last week. Yep. I absolutely agree with that. I would personally have Aaron Jones ahead of that group, but that's only because I know I'm going to get Jordan Mason later on. Like, that's the decision I will make every time. If I take Aaron Jones, I'm going to get a Vikings starting running back the entire year. That's valuable to me. I don't mind Swift over Etienne. And when this draft happened, I was pretty certain the Bears would sign Nick Chubb. Now that Nick Chubb is not there, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I don't believe in Rashad Johnson. I don't believe in Monangai, whoever the Syracuse running back is that they have as that bruiser running back. By default, if we think the Bears offense is going to be good, the way it's currently constructed, and I don't think there's really any other avenues to project, Swift is right. It just feels gross because we know Ben Johnson doesn't really like DeAndre Swift and that he wasn't all that good last year.
Okay, I totally agree with that. But if he hated him as much as we're saying he does, would they not have gone out of their way to bring somebody else in by now? They had every opportunity in the draft. I know they kept getting sniped, but you could reach in the middle of the draft to make sure you get that guy. They had an opportunity to bring in Nick Chubb, ostensibly. They decided not to. I understand what you're saying, but I think they've had opportunities here to correct this and have not done it.
Yeah, the Nick Chubb one in particular, you really couldn't pay him $3.5 million. Would he have chose to do that? Is he scared off of the Bear situation. That one's troubling to me. I think that what you're referring to is Ryan Poles being a dumb general manager and consequentially impacting things. And I know that people get angry when we make these statements. I'm not necessarily applying it to Ryan Poles. You and I can be as good of general managers as one or two people in the NFL. I firmly believe this, that just because they have this position and title doesn't mean that they are this infinite football mind relative to what you and I do on a day-to-day basis. I truly, truly believe that that's the case. And maybe we're not the greatest examples. I get that. There are people who could be. So you have to just kind of point to, well, Ryan Foles is not infallible. He made a mistake. He thought he could be savvy enough to get Judkins in the early second round. They weren't aggressive enough to trade up for it. And then they kind of made mistakes throughout the whole draft. And maybe they're trusting their medical staff too much when it comes to Nick Chubb, or trusting Roshan Johnson too much. Like there's a lot of ways in which we as humans can make errors that others can very plainly see are going to be errors. And I think that's how I would describe it. So right now, as it stands, the Bears backfield, to answer your question, it should be Isaiah Pacheco, then Aaron Jones, then DeAndre Swift, and then it should be Travis Etienne over Tony Pollard. I firmly believe that. I trust a lot of Liam Cohen in the offense for Jacksonville. I think Travis Etienne is that guy, but I don't mind if somebody wants to say Tony Pollard should go above that group. It stops there, though. Tony Pollard should not go ahead of Aaron Jones, and right now he should not go ahead of DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I think Pollard versus Etienne is an interesting debate. I think to me there's maybe slightly more upside in a best case scenario for Etienne. I think you could probably talk me into Tony Pollard being a safer option from a workload perspective, depending on your evaluation of Tajay Spears. I'm higher on the Jaguars offense than I am the Tennessee Titans right now, which is not a hot take. And I think in order to be in on Etienne in the way that I am, you have to, consequentially, to use your word, not be all that excited about Bashal Tuten and, not be all that excited about Tank Bigsby. Whereas I think there are fewer roadblocks for Tony Pollard. I think there's a lower ceiling. There's maybe a higher floor for him. But the more I dug in on the numbers for Etienne, I mean, we're not that far removed from Etienne being what I think like RB3 or 4 a couple of years ago. Had an insane workload to get there. I think he carried it like 247 times or something like that. That's not happening again. But he was also super inefficient. And I think he could do a lot more as a pass catcher than he did last season. I think that's going to be an interesting debate and interesting to see how those ADPs shape up. And to go back to Pacheco as well, like I'm not a huge Pacheco guy. At the same time, I think the cost has fallen to the point where I have no choice but to be in on him. And what's interesting there is like there's no obvious pivot. Like if you're anti-Pacheco, I think it has to be resting on this belief that he's just not going to be the same guy after the injury. Because if you're anti-ETN, you could say, no, I think Tank Bigsby is going to be the guy, or I think Bashal Tutin's going to have a big role. We're not drafting anybody else on the Chiefs as though they're going to be a factor. Like Kareem Hunt is going outside the top 200. Like there's nobody else.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's really interesting too, because we would assume the Chiefs offense to be at least top half in the NFL. Now, maybe that doesn't happen again due to injuries
or in scoring last year, and what felt like a disastrous year for them.
Yeah, or like the Tampa 2 coverage that Chris Collinsworth is going to complain about, whatever. Like maybe that's going to be all of the frustrations with it. You're right. I like Elijah Mitchell. I actually like Brashard Smith as well too, if we're talking about like super deep dynasty leagues and things like that. They don't hold a candle to Isaiah Pacheco, and what this is going to be a contract year for Pacheco, more or less as well too. You're right. Absolutely. And more importantly, there is no goal line running back or player for that team. Like you could say Andy Reid and his mustache can craft all these fun little plays in the red zone. There isn't a Mahomes quarterback sneak. They don't do that. You can't have 38-year-old Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce run these like gadgety slant routes every time. That doesn't happen anymore. Pacheco has to run forward for 2 yards and get a first down or score. And there is nobody else on that roster that can currently do that. So I agree with you.
Chiefs were 8th in the NFL in terms of red zone attempts last season. So, again, it feels like the sky is falling in Kansas City with how this offense has looked the last 2 years. At worst, when they're absolutely bottoming out, they're still a top half of the league offense. They're still, visiting the red zone 65 times, more than the Bengals, more than the Rams, more than the Vikings last season. All right, we're going to cut it off there, Joe. Really good stuff. Appreciate you putting the work in on this draft. You can go check out Joe's recap article up on the site right now. What else do you have coming? I know you said you're working on like 5 articles right now.
Yeah. We're going to do an article up on the redraft when we talked about last week, some more strategy stuff just for people that are in more casual leagues to that degree. I have another article. If you bombed your draft, which we actually ended up doing one of those unironically, one of the themes was basically for me to bomb a draft and what you're supposed to do afterwards. So trying to talk about the strategy of that. And we're only a few weeks away from the live podcast at the Scott Fish Bowl draft in Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to be doing with Jim Coventry June 29th. It'll be on this network as well, too. Because of that, I got some Scott Fish Bowl strategy articles, too. We're putting the RotoWire projections to work and seeing what that will look in the fold with the scoring system that was released earlier this week for the Scott Fish Bowl. So, like you said, lots of content to come on JB Fantasy Sports Twitter.
Yeah, and you and I will be hosting some live shows at the
SFGA
Summer Conference in Chicago in a few weeks. So very much looking forward to that. We will have a ton of content coming your way over at rotowire.com. And as you can now see fully on your screen with that draft board off there, code YouTube15, use that at rotowire.com, 15% off any of our subscriptions. Joe, good stuff, man. We'll talk next week.
Sounds good.